Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm here to read a magazine. Today's magazine is Teen Favorites, issue number 16, dated May 1978. And this magazine is the same title that I had reviewed earlier. The earlier magazine was issue 11, so you figure there's about 5 months spanning those two issues. And there are quite a bit of differences between the two. The first issue I read was it was very promotional. It was the type of magazine where if you were already fans of those celebrities that were featured in issue 11, the articles largely focused on, well, you made a good choice, and we're going to tell you why you're fans of these individuals. Whereas this issue, the tone is a little different. Some of the subjects, they question whether their readers will be fans of them. There's also a bit of a change in terms of the subject matter or the celebrities profiled. I get the feeling that they were heading for a more adult audience than they did in issue 11. And I'll discuss that. There are also some changes in that I think some of the stories are a little bit more cynical, not terribly cynical, but for example, Cindy Williams, who is the co-star of Laverne and Shirley, which was I think the one of the top 5 shows on TV at the time. Issue 11, they kind of they went to great pains to say that, any rumors of fighting between Cindy Williams and her co-star, Penny Marshall, were not true. These guys get along great, and it's just terrific. Whereas in this issue, they acknowledge that Cindy Williams does have some issues with her co-star, and by extension, the producers, because Penny Marshall, the show is being produced by her brother Gary Marshall. So there's a lot of Marshalls involved in that show, and there was only one Williams. So she was having a tough time at that time, and they're actually acknowledging it here. So the fighting had gotten so bad, the producers no longer were interested in stomping the rumors, and basically the sides were kind of explaining what is going on, their point of view. So the magazine here is definitely taking Cindy Williams' side, simply because she's the one who's talking to them. Okay, so beyond Cindy Williams, you can take a look at the cover. There's also Kevin Brophy. He was star of a show that I really liked called Lucan, and this is sort of the Wolf Boy. It was sort of one of these loners, travels the country and helps people with their problems. But, rather than say hulking out, he kind of would channel sort of this wolf spirit, because apparently he had some type of connection with wolves. So it's just basically the Hulk, but instead with the Wolf Boy. We also see Leif Garrett. Leif Garrett is in this issue, but rather than the kind of the promotional puff piece that was in the previous issue, this issue is asking whether Leif can maintain his stardom. And they also asked that question of Sean Cassidy too, whether he'll be a flash in the pan. So this magazine is sort of not taking for granted that the readers will still like them, because the thing with these type of magazines is that they are largely aiming for kind of a fickle market. Teenagers, there are also pre-teenagers, and there are adults who may gravitate toward these type of personalities. There are also some more adult subjects, such as Chris Christopherson, and there's also more heavy rock music, which is something you normally normally magazines like this would stay away from. For example, they're profiling Aerosmith in this particular issue, and you do actually get a free poster of Aerosmith. See what else is going on. We have Scotty and Jimmy Baio. What are the differences? Scott Baio actually had a brother, Jimmy. Jimmy was actually on a kind of a better show, Soap. He was a little different than Scott, both physically and also in terms of the type of persona that they had. And there's also the Keenan brothers, who I have no idea who these two guys are. I'm assuming that someone was trying to make fetch happen, and it didn't. But these guys kind of had some pull in terms of promotion. They must have had a really good publicist, or the backing. They must have put some money into these two kids. I honestly have no idea who they are. And they also returned to KISS, and Mark Hamill answers your fan mails. Remember, Star Wars had just came out a few months earlier. So I'm going to go into the magazine. Okay, so we have the table of contents here, and it doesn't really change that much, except they're featuring different personalities. There's also some competitions. The magazine had a Valerie Bertinelli look-alike contest with basically kind of Timo Valerie Bertinelli's. And there's also an upcoming Willie Ames look-alike contest. And I'm going to go into the magazine. So I'm going to look at the mailbag here. The questions aren't terribly interesting. I'll just kind of mention the subjects that readers are reading, that readers are writing about. Michael McKean, Mark Hamill, the Bay City Rollers, Leif Garrett, Elvis Presley, who had passed away less than a year ago, Starsky and Hutch, which is still popular, Paul Stanley. So some of the readers want to know about him. It's just kind of regular fan service. There's nothing particularly interesting or insightful about either the questions or the answers. So now I'm going to go into what's the buzz on TV. So what they're saying here is that 1977 was a big year for science fiction. Of course, that was the year of Star Wars. There was also Close Encounters. And there are a few others. And basically what they're saying here is that 1978 will be musicals. Musicals will be the big thing. Now, obviously, there is the one big kahuna, and that was Grease. And that was covered in issue 11. The movie itself had not come out at that point, but they clearly had the promotional material ready to tell the kids, this is why you're going to enjoy this film. They're also mentioning Sgt. Pepper, which is a huge bomb, although I do recommend watching that film. As bad as it is very watchable. And another film called American Hot Wax, which I'm not that familiar with. They're going to go into some radio personalities that I don't really care about. They're asking, is Farrah Fawcett going to be Sheena, Queen of the Jungle? We know that isn't the case. That went to Tanya Roberts a few years later in a really terrible film. Though I will say Farrah looks absolutely beautiful in this picture here. And there's some Nick Nolte and Tuesday Weld. They're doing a film, and that they kind of like each other. Who cares? Debbie Boone. Debbie Boone had a monster hit. She was a one-hit wonder, one of the biggest one-hit wonders ever, with "You Light Up My Life." I loved the song as a kid. I could not listen to it now. It is so syrupy and kind of like schlocky. It's basically a love ballad to God. But it made Debbie a huge star for about a year or so. And I remember seeing her in a TV movie a few years later in which she played an escort. I guess she was trying to kind of change her image. Now, she's not an unattractive woman, but she was kind of big. She kind of like was big boned, and it was really strange, like seeing her in playing the role of an escort with that big kind of like linebacker body of hers. As Billy Crystal, he was making news at the time because he was playing a an LGBT character on Soap. He was funny on that show, I remember. And they're talking about James Caan here, where James Caan is kind of hanging out at the Playboy Mansion a lot. And James had a rough time at this time, both with his marriage and with his career. So it continues. Bob Dylan, he's having marital problems. They're talking about the new Star Trek film that is going into production, or that they are hoping will go into production. The big holdup right now is Leonard Nimoy. At this point, he's the only one who had not signed on to do the movie. And it's not going to be Star Trek without Leonard Nimoy or Mr. Spock. And we know that eventually happened in Star Trek, the motion picture. The tagline was, "In space, no one can hear you yawn." It kind of looked like Spa Track from the aesthetics used. Although I gotta say, those uniforms look really comfortable compared to those horrible double knits that they used in the other movies. The uniforms that literally made Patrick Stewart cry because they were so uncomfortable when he was wearing those outfits in The Next Generation. They had to redesign the outfit, gave him like a petticoat. Because he was just so miserable in that, in those really heavy threads. And they're talking about James Taylor here, how he became a born-again Christian. And then we see an ad for a tribute to Elvis, which there were tons of tributes to him at this point. Okay, so I'm going to go into the first article. Mark Hamill answers your fan letters. Okay, so Mark at this point, he had just struck it big with Luke Skywalker. Probably a year earlier, he was guest starring on sitcoms like One Day at a Time. He was doing Polaroid commercials. He does Star Wars. He is a huge star. He is like the hottest property in Hollywood. Mark is kind of like, a little overwhelmed by that, but he's also a little surprised by this because he's a guy, he didn't really think of himself as a great acting talent. He didn't even think of himself as really that good looking a guy, which isn't true. He's kind of a good looking guy. Mark did not have a great Hollywood career, so to speak, in terms of the classic, huge Hollywood career like Harrison Ford had. But nevertheless, he has nothing to be ashamed of. So he's kind of ragging on his height and his looks, but Mark did pretty well for himself. He's talking about his new movie called Stingray. Stingray would eventually become Chevrolet Summer. If you have not seen Chevrolet Summer, I recommend it. It's certainly not a great film, but it is a fun film. I enjoyed watching it. It's a bit of a time capsule. Mark was perfectly cast as the super senior in that movie. He plays a high school student. Now, at this point, he had just aged out of characters like that. So you look at him and you're saying, hold it, this guy's a high school student. But then you think about it. Hold it. What about those guys who are left back two or three times? Mark is perfect. He looks like a guy who looks like he had been left back at least twice. And so that's why the film worked for me. And he's saying that a lot of the girls who like John Travolta and Donny Osmond are kind of like gravitating toward him. Okay, so yeah, Mark's kind of has a nice, he has a good head on his shoulders. Next, we're going to go to Sean Cassidy, and they're asking, will he be a flash in the pan? And yeah, he turned out to be that. But nevertheless, Sean had that one moment. He had that one successful album. He did remakes. He was pretty good at it. I particularly liked the remake of Hey Deanie that he had done. But nevertheless, they're kind of asking the readers, hey, you like this guy now. Will you like him 6 months from now? And they're kind of giving some reasons why, hey, you might not care for this guy 6 months from now. His career might not have legs. Yeah, he's a good-looking guy, and he had a couple of hit songs, but there are lots of flashes in the pan. And they're asking, is Sean going to be one of those? I remember when Sean did a movie where he played a guy with developmental issues. And he had married a woman who had developmental issues. And it was cringy at times, but it was also kind of entertaining and sweet in its way. Okay, so then we're going to go to Willie Ames. Willie Ames was a big TV star at the time, 8 is Enough. I was a fan of that show. 8 Enough is a show that is looked upon as kind of like an example of bad TV. And critics, I should say, TV critics, were using 8 is Enough as an example of this is how bad TV is right now. But I always enjoyed the show. Willie Ames is kind of like of that age where, yeah, he's going to be one of the teen idols. He's a good-looking guy. I remember him also doing a show that focused on teens at the time. It was like in the late 70s, early 80s. And I remember enjoying that. He eventually, as an adult, he became Bible Man, which I think even he's embarrassed by that now. But he got into Christianity. He ended up working outside of Hollywood. And he had done various jobs, including being like kind of a cruise director. And my brother says he knows someone who went on a cruise where he was the director. He said he was a really nice guy. Next is Jodie Foster. Jodie Foster, Hollywood legend. She built a great career for herself. So at this point, they're emphasizing that Jodie is getting older. She's 15 years old. She's transitioning from, kids roles to adult roles. And they feel pretty confident about her. And it worked out fine for her. So I'm going to go into one of her rivals at the time. And this is Tatum O'Neal. And I remember Tatum from Paper Moon. And the focus of this article is her, quote, dating Michael Jackson. And it really turns out that she wasn't really dating him. It seems like the two were friends. There were some parallels between his life and her life. Michael Jackson had the horribly abusive stage dad. Tatum's father, Ryan O'Neal, he wasn't an easy guy to deal with too. I don't know if there were any abuse accusations. I don't think she ever made any. But nevertheless, it wasn't easy being the daughter of Ryan O'Neal. So her and Michael Jackson, they would connect. They usually talked over the phone. And I guess they were just kind of commiserating their current situation. Apparently, they became really close over the phone. But the thing is that when they actually met in person, there wasn't any real chemistry between the two of them, and so it really wasn't a romantic relationship, the way it's described here. I don't know if she ever kind of changed the history of it, so to speak. So anyway, again, Tatum was struggling with, stardom, and Michael Jackson was too, along with struggling with Joe Jackson beating him, his father. So I'm going to go into the next article, Scott and Jimmy Baio, a study in contrast. Really, I don't think we really need this. Clearly, Scott's the better looking of the two. Jimmy's kind of a pudgy guy here. I think Jimmy was the better actor of the two. And he actually had a much more difficult role to play on Soap compared to Happy Days. I never really had any issues with Scott Baio on Happy Days. He wasn't a draw for me, but at the same time, I didn't see him as a detriment either. Jimmy Baio's character on Soap, I kind of tuned him out. He was just a little kid, so I really didn't care about his antics on the show. So yeah, they're kind of spending a lot of time just kind of contrasting the two actors. See an ad for some posters here. Get John Travolta, the Bay City Rollers. Those are probably collecting dust. Donnie and Marie, Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, the Sweat Hogs, and so forth. Okay, so the next article is, can Leif Garrett be a singer and actor and survive? So again, this is another article kind of questioning whether the readers are going to be a fan of Leif. And they're wondering whether Leif is kind of stretching himself too thin, because he's a guy who started out as an actor. He was able to carry a tune, so he transitioned into music. He had a couple of minor, kind of mid-level hits in the 1970s, just kind of remaking other artists' songs. He had his one big hit in '78 was "I Was Made for Dancing." I think he also had a TV special at the time. So Leif's career is kind of in transition here, because he's kind of figuring out, well, should I stick with acting? Should I stick with singing? Am I still going to be popular doing these things, and so forth? I think what happened was Leif had he was driving while inebriated, and I know he had a friend in the car, and the friend ended up being paralyzed. So that derailed his career quite a bit, because he was obviously, because it tainted his image. Also, it affected him personally too, and he never really recovered. I do remember when he was on American Bandstand, and Dick Clark was really being a kind of a dick toward him, in that he was sort of asking him these questions about, how much of what we see is really you, and how much is manufactured. So Dick Clark was calling Leif Garrett out, basically saying that he was sort of a managed celebrity, kind of like, that was aimed at, kind of just being a popular star. So basically, Dick Clark was calling Leif Garrett out, kind of saying that basically, you're kind of a manufactured personality, so we don't really have a good idea how much of what we see on TV is you, and how much of it is sort of this manufactured image. Leif, I think, was 11 at the time. He was kind of thrown off by this, because he's being asked this very adult, cynical question, and he he did answer fairly well, to be honest. So next we're going to go into the Keene brothers. I have no idea who these guys were. Zero. I'm assuming, once again, they had some type of publicist. They didn't even reach Hanson level fame, to be honest. So I guess they're in here because their management had spent some money to get this article and give them some publicity. So the next article is on John Travolta. He gets what he wants. Now there was some focus, I should say, on John Travolta in the previous issue, but it was almost exclusively about Grease, which is a very teen safe movie. This was not the case with Saturday Night Fever. Saturday Night Fever, if you've never seen it, people have kind of strange ideas in that they focus on the disco aspects of it, and they tend to think of it as sort of, kind of one of these kind of like feel-good movies. And Saturday Night Fever is not a feel-good movie. That it is a dark movie, and it kind of throws people off for a loop. I love Saturday Night Fever because I think it's one of the best films about addiction, and the movie really is about addiction. You have the character Tony Manero. The only time he feels alive was when he goes to that disco. Now the thing is that Manero and his friends, because they're viewed as kind of a draw to the disco, they get in free. But the thing is, they still have to pay for their drinks, and that's an issue. You have to pay like $20, $25 drinks, and you're kind of making maybe $4 an hour. And so the thing is that you have that issue with addiction where the thing you're addicted to you can't afford, and this is just something that Manero was going through. And I'm kind of struggling to think. I don't work from scripts, so this is why sometimes I struggle. Of course, what was interesting is that in 1977, when the film was being shot in New York, discos were actually having a hard time business-wise because the Son of Sam killer was so terrifying New Yorkers that young people, particularly young women who were his target, they were not going out to discos. They would go to work and they would immediately go home. This is how much terror the city was, and I remember those years quite well with no fondness because that piece of shit, he put our city through hell. But it's also, Saturday Night Fever is also kind of a movie on humanity, because it's like, what happens at the end. He has a shoulder to cry on. He has that person who's going to hug him when things get tough and tell him that it's okay. And it's kind of like, that's something most people strive for. So I'm going to go into the next story. This is Cindy Williams. Cindy Williams, this is her side of the story about the fighting between her and her co-star Penny Marshall, and by extension the Marshall family, which is producing the show. So Cindy Williams was kind of going at it alone. She had issues with the fact that, obviously there's going to be some favoritism, and it's not going to be directed, towards Cindy. It's going to be directed toward Penny. And she's sort of making her case about, what's going on. So this is kind of an acknowledgement that there are issues with the show. The show was in the top 5 at the time, if not the top show. I loved it. I actually enjoyed it more than Happy Days. Although, to be honest, it was really Lenny and Squiggy that were the draw for me. So Cindy's also talking about her movie success, or what she was doing in the movies, and she had a fairly successful career in the movies. She did the first nudie musical, which she thought was kind of just like kind of a lark. Then she did a film called The Conversation, which was directed by Francis Ford Coppola. The Conversation is a great movie, but it's not a plot-driven movie. It was really the atmosphere and the tone and the mood of the film that makes it engaging. It's not the story itself. Okay, so we have the lookalike contest. We see the Valerie Bertinelli lookalike results. Yeah, these are basically Timu, Valerie Bertinelli. I mean, I hope these young girls, had happy lives and they're still with us, but they really don't look that much like Valerie. And then we see the Willie Ames lookalike contest. Willie Ames is with his co-star Diane Kay, who is just so beautiful. So yeah, if you look like Willie, kind of get you might end up in this magazine. Okay, and then talking about how success has changed Aerosmith, which was odd because Aerosmith was sort of on the downturn in their careers at this point. They had done Sergeant Pepper, even though it had not been released at this point. They actually put in one of the better performances in that film. But nevertheless, yeah, there were issues going on with the band. Of course, then they had that big comeback in 1986 when they teamed up with Run DMC. I remember I played that song to death, Walk This Way. Okay, the next subject is Chris Christopherson, who, again, kind of a middle-aged guy. He's a good-looking guy, but he's kind of a middle-aged guy. I guess there are some teen girls who are kind of into him. Now, he had just starred in a film with Barbra Streisand called A Star Is Born. That movie has been remade at least 4 times. The most recent one, and it was a pretty good one, was with Lady Gaga and what's his name? Milton Bradley. I forgot his name. He's Rocket Raccoon. I mostly know him from The Voice. I don't really remember A Star Is Born being that good a film, to be honest. At least this version of it, this remake of it. The Lady Gaga one was pretty good. The Julie Garland one was actually a pretty good film too. Okay, so we have Born to Rock and Roll. These are kind of like small little anecdotes about musical acts. One is about Leonard Skinner, the airplane crash that had killed most of the band, including their lead singer. I think was it Ronnie Van Zant? I forgot. So they're talking about how they're trying to reform the band after that terrible accident. I think a couple of the guys got together. Was it Collinsworth? I think. And they had released an album which almost sold 1 million copies. So it was a bit of a surprise. But their follow-ups were not able to kind of capitalize on that. They're talking about Earth, Wind, and Fire. How their concerts are getting much more. They're getting larger and they're getting more theatrical. Earth, Wind, and Fire. They were in a movie. They weren't the stars of it, but they were in a movie called "That's the Way of the World," and it stars Harvey Keitel, and I highly recommend that film. It's kind of a rag on the record industry. They take pot shots at the Carpenters indirectly, but it's a really good film, and it's one of those excellent kind of like this is what's going on in the music business. Talking about Farrah Fawcett, how she's doing TV movies. Sergio Mendes. I can't imagine many teen girls into him. And yeah, just kind of like, yeah, kind of like a lot of this, yeah, you don't really need to know. Even back then, you really didn't need to know this stuff. So you can see an ad with Starsky and Hutch. They were they were a huge TV show at the time. And then here's kind of like a little promotional puzzle thing that's based on Kiss. So the clues are things that are well known to Kiss fans or to music fans in general. Okay, here's an article on Kiss talking about the secrets in their past. They're just talking about their first jobs, really. Nothing terribly interesting, though. It says here that Peter Criss lives out in the suburbs of Connecticut with his wife, Linda. Of course, he was the one whose big hit was Beth. So I don't understand the... was he married to Beth at the time, or he cared more about Beth than he did Linda? I'm not sure. And here we see back issues of Teen Favorites if you wish to buy them. Some of them are sold out. The June 1977 issue is sold out. That had the Bay City Rollers poster. August 77, Sly Stallone, that was sold out. September 77, David Soul, sold out. October 77, Fleetwood Mac, sold out. And November 1977, Kiss, sold out. But if you want posters of Donnie, John Travolta, Peter Frampton, Barry Manilow, Sean Cassidy, Elvis, Lindsay Wagner, or Parker Stevenson, you are in luck. You are in luck. You can get those on your wall. Okay, here's another write-in fan service for the readers. I don't know how this differs from the mailroom, but nevertheless, they're promoting it differently. This is basically, again, fan service for these actresses. One fan wants to know whether Farrah Fawcett did an X-rated movie, and she did. It was not a naughty movie. It was a 1970 mainstream release called Myra Breckinridge, but because it had a lot of sexual subject matter, and it was kind of quite tasteless. It did get an X rating. Elton John here talking about whether he had a hair transplant or not. Elton John at the time was like losing his hair prematurely. It was kind of bothering him a little bit. Asking about Dan Haggerty here. This is when he was the star of The Life and Times of Grizzly Adams. This is basically saying, listen, I think he's a nice guy, and you know, what's up with him? And basically saying that, yeah, Dan lives in California and he has a wife, and yeah, he likes animals. Barry Manilow, someone's asking whether Barry's going to retire from the music business. He's saying, please tell me that's not the case. That was not the case. Barry had a lot of music in him. Some of it wasn't that good. There was a story where there was a particular facility. I think it was a school's parking lot. They're having trouble with wayward teens being there, and the school officials couldn't figure out how to get rid of the teens. It's similar to like when Homer Simpson was working at the bowling alley. The kids immediately disappeared when Homer started showing up there. So what the school officials did was they ended up blasting Barry Manilow music in the parking lot. The kids stayed away. Barry heard about this story, and he was ticked. He was saying, you know, these kids should be enjoying this music. You know, what's wrong with these people thinking that my music will keep teens away? And next story is on Erica Estrada. Um, yeah, he's just some background that he was born in Spanish Harlem, and that he got into acting because he liked the girl, and the girl like encouraged him, and he ended up breaking up with the girl, but he liked the acting, and he kind of kept up with it. And there's a question about the rock band Queen, and he's just asking about. I heard this song. I think it's Queen. It goes da da da, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, you're talking about this song." Okay. It goes on. They're asking about the Bay City Rollers. I remember them. As I had mentioned, I watched their Saturday TV show. Their indecipherable English, their toothiness, and their cheekiness. There were a lot of teeth and a lot of cheeks when these guys were smiling. Another one's asking about Sylvester Stallone. He was huge at the time too. His ascent and John Travolta's ascent, they kind of mirrored each other a little bit in terms of those were the top two new guys at the time. Sly, they're saying Sly has been acting since 1969. He was doing off Broadway stuff. He kind of like he was doing small roles like in Bananas, and just saying his career went from there. Talking about TV shows, San Pedro Beach Bums. The person is upset that the show got canceled, and he was wondering, are any of them going to do something else? Because he really enjoyed them. The answer back is that they just didn't have enough fans, and that the network gave up on the show. But we hope that these guys will show up somewhere. They don't care enough to actually check. Now they're talking about Alan Arkin, who done a show called Busting Loose. I love that show. I remember I was 11 years old. It was like literally my favorite show at the time. It was a short-lived show, I should say, but I thought it was great. And here's something on Susan Dey, who looks really beautiful in these photographs, even though she's crying in one of them. And Susan was sort of having a bit of a time getting taken seriously in Hollywood following her stint on The Partridge Family. It was hard breaking that image because, like I said, she's a beautiful woman who's a really good actress. But nevertheless, Laurie Partridge kind of followed her quite a bit. I do remember a story she did tell. She had done the pilot to a show in 1976. I forgot the name of it, but it took place in the Old West. And in it, her character is raped by two men. But the thing is that what the director was asking for in that scene, Susan Dey knew that it would not make TV, and that he was asking for a lot from her, and she's like, "Hold it, this is not going to get past the censors, and I know this. So are you kind of like making a private reel for yourself?" I think the director kind of denied that, but then she had asked for some of the prints back because she obviously did not want them circulating, because she felt really uncomfortable, and the producers wouldn't do it. So she kind of speculated that maybe they were sort of making their own private movie for their enjoyment. So that's kind of the seedy things that go on in Hollywood. Next is kind of like a feature on some of the musical artists at the time. Greg Allman and Cher talking about how they're going to work together musically, which is odd because given that Cher is very popish, and Greg is kind of like that, Southern rocker thing. I don't know if the two ever actually worked together. I don't recall any music coming from that marriage. I know it was a troubled marriage. It may not have been as bad as Sonny and Cher, when Cher was married to Sonny, and Sonny basically made Cher his employee. So it wasn't an actual partnership. It was Cher was an employee of Sonny. And Cher didn't really figure that out until after they got divorced and they were trying to figure out the financials. And then that's when Cher realized that she had signed a terrible deal with Sonny. Also, in terms of the marriage, because I think Sonny was cheating and Cher had caught him a couple of times. Although she was very appreciative of Sonny, because the thing was, Cher never thought she had a great talent. And it was Sonny who said, "No, you can sing." So Cher kind of gave Sonny a lot of credit for getting her into the music business. It was kind of a similar dynamic with Frankie Valli. When Frankie Valli was, when he was with the other Jersey Boys singing, he didn't think he was that great. And it was the other guys who were saying, no, we can be huge stars with your voice. So sometimes talent doesn't recognize how talented it is. Now, one other thing about the marriage between Gregg Allman and Cher is that there's an infamous picture of Gregg Allman during the wedding, when they're having the dinner. Greg was so zonked that he fell asleep in a plate of spaghetti. So his white suit was covered with tomato sauce. His face was literally in a plate of spaghetti, and the wedding photographer took a picture of that. So I'm kind of wondering how much he really liked Greg. Next is Donnie and Marie. They were huge stars at the time with their variety show, talking about maybe the two would kind of want to go their separate ways in terms of expanding their careers. There's a little thing on Leif Garrett. Again, they're talking about the fact that that he was a guy who he's a young guy, but he's remaking songs from a much earlier era. So it's kind of like, when you listen to Leif Garrett, you're sort of listening to old people's music. So that's what they're saying here. And I think this is before he had his hit, "I Was Made for Dancing." So the thing was, Leif had a growing musical career at the time, but it was sort of remaking, kind of like these old classics. And the next one is on the group The Emotions. The Emotions had that one big shining moment with "The Best of My Love," and they were never able to replicate that success. And here's an article on crocheting. Again, they're kind of aiming for that older audience. We see a collectible edition of Henry Winkler as the Fonz. So Henry Winkler was super popular. He was the big guy in 1976 on TV. One of the things that the previous issue had emphasized, they emphasized him a lot. There's not much Henry Winkler in this here. Henry had done a few movies. They were not box office successes, so he was not able to transition from being the Fonz. So he continued being the Fonz much longer than he should have. I think one of the movies he had done was Heroes, a film that I kind of liked, but it's not a great film. And I think there was The One and Only, which is a wrestling film, which I've never seen, but I'm sure it's horrible. Next article is on the Up and Up. These are musical acts. City Boy and Kathy Chamberlain. I'm not familiar with either one of these musical artists. So I'm guessing that they have a really good publicist. And yeah, just some tips on blow drying your hair. And the last article is on Kevin Brophy. He was the star of Lucan. He had a kind of an interesting career in that after the show had been canceled, he didn't make very much money, so he kind of needed to kind of make some money onto his next acting job. And he took a job basically being a parking attendant at some like fancy resort. And the job paid so well that he gave up acting and he just basically was a car hop. And he had done this for decades and he was fine with it. But then I think he had some health issues and he had to he couldn't perform his job duties, and he was kind of like in a lurch financially because of the health issues. But it turned out there was a fan of the show who had identified with the Lucan character because he was a guy who kind of like had an affinity for wolves, and he felt that he had some type of kinship. He was a big fan of the show, and when he died, because he didn't really connect with any people, because he was kind of a loner, a lone wolf, he had he had left behind all his money to Kevin Brophy when he passed away. And it turned out to be a nice hunk of change. And so Kevin Brophy was like very appreciative. He was like, at a time where I needed some money, this guy dies and leaves me a shitload of it. So, yeah, so that's it. So that is my look at Teenage Favorites, issue number 16. And I hope to have more of these soon. Bye.